Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Leadership Matters. My name is Les Stein, and I serve as the faculty lead for the Master of Science in Organizational Leadership program at Northeastern University's College of Professional Studies. This is going to be our first in the leadership webinar series for this academic year. And those of you who attend all of the 3 sessions will earn a level 1 badge from Northeastern University. Our goal is in presenting the 3 webinar series is to raise everyone's awareness about the undeniable role of leadership in today's global society. I would argue that everything that happened throughout our history has been the product of either good or bad leadership. If we find that and develop great leaders, our world will be much better off. Today, we start with a discussion about the role of leadership in the information technology field. Serving as our moderator is Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, assistant professor in our leadership program. Sriram's background is in both project management and leadership. He has held senior leadership positions with several large organizations and written numerous articles in professional journals. In 2020, his book, Organized Common Sense: Why Do Project Management Skills Apply to Everyone, was published. Sriram, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Les, for the wonderful introduction and also setting the stage for our Leadership Matters webinar series. As part of the Northeastern University College of Professional Studies Graduate Leadership Program, it's my honor and privilege to welcome the 3 panelists, Adam Sandman, Dudley Backhouse, and Jim Lux. Each one is an expert in their field, using IT services in many industries. Let me first introduce the panelists to the audience. Adam Sandman has been a programmer since the age of 10. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Inflectra, a leader of software test management, application lifecycle management, project, program, and portfolio management, risk management, and automation platform. He is responsible for product strategy, technology innovation, and business development. Adam, can you raise your hand one more time just so that people know who they are?
Hello, well, nice to be here, Sriram. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. Dudley Backhouse is a founding partner of SAE.SO. He has several years of experience serving both in the Chief Information Officer and Chief Technology Officer capacity in many organizations in numerous countries. He has defined innovative opportunities, redefined processes, and also transformed organizations towards both growth and sustainability. Dudley, can you please do the honors? And thank you. Jim Lux has led IT organizations in multi-unit retail businesses for over 20 years. Currently, Jim serves as the Vice President of IT for Ascend Wellness Group or Holdings, a fast-growing multi-state cannabis operator. Jim also teaches graduate leadership program for Northeastern University, bringing his practitioner outlook. Jim, can you do the honors and wave yourselves so that
Sure.
people know who you are?
Thanks a lot, Sriram. Appreciate the introduction very much. Look forward to getting going here.
Thank you, thank you. Adam, Dudley, and Jim, I know I have worked with all of you, and I also continue to engage with you in different capacities. Thank you for giving your time and also sharing your knowledge with our audience. The audience includes our current students, alumni working in different organizations in many countries, full-time and adjunct faculties, and people gainfully employed looking forward to learning more about why leadership matters in their role. Now, given that we have limited time, 1 hour for this panel, I would appreciate it if you keep your responses brief and also perhaps bring an example from your experience to connect. Now, without further ado, let me start my first question. When you see the marketplace today, there are requests for positions like project manager, program manager, engineer, tester, creative artist, and the list go on. There is no specific job request that I have seen for a strategic leader that people are hiring. But senior leaders are always looking for leadership competencies in the people they hire for strategic program project delivery or managing client relationships and bringing incremental and radical innovations. So Adam, I want to start with you. How much do you feel that the quality of leadership in the people hired in any capacity in your organization has a direct impact on the company's success? If so, can you please give me an example and elaborate?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. We work in the knowledge-based economy. The Inflectra, my company, we build complex computer software, which is being used by customers in complex industries like life sciences, healthcare, defense, manufacturing, and so on. So these are complex problems. And so no one person's going to know all the answers. I may have founded the company 15 years ago, but my knowledge is based on what experiences I had 15 years ago. When we bring people into the company, we're looking for people not just to do a job, not just to follow orders, as it were, but to actually bring their experiences and their skills and their understanding of where they're working and lead for whatever role it is. So again, to be concrete with an example, we often send people to trade shows, and I know that's a different group of people. It could be 2 people from our sales team will go with a technical person. They're all going to go, unsupervised to a trade show, and they have to go meet clients and talk to them and learn and listen. And when they come back, they're going to have experiences and ideas that they're going to need to teach people who may be their nominal boss. But leadership is about understanding a vision and sharing a vision. That's one of the commies of leadership. And so those people, to me, they bring that to the table. And then on the other end of the scale, people who work in our customer support department, dealing with customers who may not be the happiest because something's not working at that moment. They're going to have to listen to them patiently, help the customer, but also in that interaction, they will learn why the customer is frustrated. And if you can bring that back to the rest of the company, and again, show leadership and be able to explain to someone why it matters, then the company can organically improve its products versus having to have hundreds of top-down meetings and formal leadership things to try and figure out how to make a product more usable. You're able to take the leadership within each of your people, and it organically improves what you're doing. And that's my thoughts.
That's wonderful. And I heard about knowledge-based economy, and repeatedly you mentioned listening, which is very critical for leaders. And that's wonderful, Adam. Dudley, I know you have managed a lot of mission-critical platforms as well. So what are your thoughts on what Adam was mentioning? Can you elaborate on it?
I can, from my own experiences. I'm looking for different attributes depending on the context. So within SAE.SO, which is my company now as a smaller agency, I'm looking for more a competency based necessary to augment because we have a specific need within the organization to drive forward or to deliver or address some sort of customer value. But if I draw necessarily onto some previous experiences of having worked in a much larger organization, I'm more so looking at less necessarily the competency, but more of the behavioral aspects. The larger the teams and the larger the organization, in my perspective, it's about productivity. And the more senior you are in an organization, the more your influence and delivery is through others rather than necessarily just yourself. So your behaviors, if you're unable to motivate and inspire others and not bring others along with you, the collective effect of that, of not being successful, is magnified through the whole of the team structure. So for me, in a larger organization, a leadership role, it's very rare that you become necessarily the subject matter experts of the domains underneath that role. So you have to have trust in your leadership underneath you. But more so for me, the behavior of senior leadership is being able to motivate others, because if you can't succeed.
Very well said. Very well said, Dudley. I heard you say, productivity is a function of a number of different things like behaviors, which drive into value, trust, motivation, inspiration. This is good. Is there a specific example that you may want to give us that brings these things together?
I would do is, I'll draw back to probably one, in my experience, I've probably learned a lot more from my mistakes than I have necessarily my successes. And, back in 2006, which seems a long time ago now, I'd made a decision against the advice of some of my team, which proved to be wrong, causing a huge implication for an organization. And then having to take a step back from that and trust my team to remediate the situation and remove my own pride and ego. And I think for me, the example there around leadership was really learning a very hard lesson that to trust my SMEs, because they're closer to the problem, and B, the absolute need for objectivity away from ego and pride, which we can sometimes, especially in a large organization, get very carried away with in the politics.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you used yourself as an example over here, Dudley. That speaks volumes about you here. Jim, you come from the retail background, and particularly in pandemic, that particular industry has been hit very hard. And I'm sure within the scope of IT, there will be a lot of processes in terms of checks and balances to ensure that things are doing the right way and things like that. So based on what both Adam and Dudley were mentioning here, is there any more color that you can add based upon your experience?
Sure. I like this question a lot, and particularly the focus on in any capacity. I've always I believe strongly that we need leaders at all levels, and just because you don't have positional leadership doesn't mean you shouldn't practice leadership. Oftentimes people think leaders are those that have employees or direct reports, and I try to get people to think like leaders regardless of what their role. So I think this question is great in that regard. And I'm in a company that is 3 years old, and we have 1,500 employees already. I'm just a few months into this role and the first IT leader in the company, and I'm about to double my size of my team because cannabis industry, fast growing industry, and most of the multi-state operators are also very fast growing. So to Adam's point, to Dudley's point, we can't be subject matter experts at everything, particularly at this rate of growth. So I look to hire folks that can show leadership in the roles that we put them into, and grow into more to do better for the organization. Adam said bring skills from trade shows or from prior experiences, and that lifts the organization. It makes everybody better.
That's very well said, Jim. I appreciate how everything is coming down to leadership is not necessarily people at the top, but leadership is everybody that comes together, providing opportunities for growth and sustainability and everything else. And I wanted to pick up a couple of key trends over here. I think it was Dudley who mentioned also about value here. So I'm sure you all have heard about the constant delivery of value in the IT industry. And this leads me to the second question. And several years back, I have heard people, even practitioners, say information technology is nothing more than a tool for the business and doesn't represent the business. But I think history has told different things at this point. If you look at Amazon Web Services, that was not a top-down thinking. It was more about a couple of engineers, particularly Chris Pinkham and Benjamin Black from the engineering division, who went and said, hey, there is a better way of doing computing infrastructure. And similarly, even in an academic setting, Linus Torvalds came and said, let's come up with a Linux operating system. And he is also the founder behind the Git architecture, which is now for source code management and source code revision controls and things like that. And even if you roll the history a little bit back, James Gosling was originally part of Sun Microsystems, now part of Oracle, was the person who came back with the notion of, write code once and run it, anywhere else. These are all examples of leadership by example or leading by example to me in my mind. What does leadership mean to you? That means leadership by example, leading by example. What does that mean to you? Can you share an example to illustrate such a bottom-up thinking in your organization from your, or in your experience? Dudley, if you don't mind, may I start with you on this particular question?
I think, what does leadership mean to me? I mean, the first and foremost is innovation is fantastic. But the reality is we need to take responsibility for the dynamics and the core fundamentals of a business. And that is generally either to generate revenue, and that is delivered through the ability to deliver whatever the customer or the organizational need is. So the first thing of leadership isn't necessarily being the most innovative. It's taking responsibility for the commitments of the organization to its client. Because without its client, it has no business. It has a bunch of ideas or a bunch of energy, but it has no income. So the first thing for me that I look for in good leadership is understanding how the business becomes sustainable and grows, and then motivates its internals to deliver to those things. I think then it's also the other good thing of leadership is, as you say, is understanding the market. In technology, we're all very good at building either apps or building software. And yes, we can get excited, but is anybody willing to pay for it? And I think we're moving into a market now as, the art of the possible has become infinite now with technology. It's just time and cost. But sometimes I think good leadership is also questioning is not necessarily what we could do, of whether we should do it. And because if there's no, commercialization, on a business fundamental, it really can turn into a vanity project. So good leadership also is finding the balance of, is there a need, not necessarily internally, but also externally, that somebody else feels the same value, but they're also willing to exchange that value, dollars, for the proposition that you've built. Because you've definitely, so for me, some good leadership is understanding necessarily of how to help the company grow. And also understanding both the internal value creation and also the external valuation to try and create product and to nurture the proposition of the organization in the marketplace.
Excellent, excellent. Dudley, perhaps from your experience, is there an example that you can tell, this is an example of bottom-up innovation, which was, if you could share that.
So going back to my time in the larger organization, is one of my guys had a small piece of innovation that an organization itself didn't necessarily want to sponsor. They came to see me as the owner of the business unit, and I managed to rally some support in some place of the organization to allow us to do an innovation and prototyping project. And we managed to get that support. And from that tiny seed of thinking and critical thinking down in the rank and file, 3 years later turned into 478 million of new revenue line coming in for that particular product to the organization. So I think sometimes our responsibility is also to listen, because sometimes some of the best ideas and some of the best innovations come from those closer to the problem. And I think for me is in the rank and the file of listening to somebody and actually trusting them that they were correct. We managed to actually turn something very, very successful, obviously leveraging the assets of the larger organization, but opening up new channels and opportunities for the organization itself, coming from not necessarily the leadership, but somebody very close to the problem. And I think sometimes the more senior we get, and we confuse leadership with seniority sometimes, is the challenge is we think we need to have all of the answers. And sometimes we need to have actually just the opposite of actually the best listening skills.
That's excellent. Your response reminds me of a book that I read about titleless leadership, where everybody is a leader and you just need to demonstrate it. And it's interesting that you are bringing everything back to the focus of listening to people that are closer to the problem at hand. but at the same time also trying to keep a relatively good balance of what comes into the company in terms of revenues as well as the cost of ownership in sustaining it. So it's very interesting that you see this. Adam, from your viewpoint, what else do you see as leadership by example? Is there anything else that you can add to this?
Right, and I agree wholeheartedly with Dudley. We get a lot of people, before I get into my answer, we do get a lot of people coming to us with ideas of, hey, we want to integrate with you. We've got this great new business idea. And we as a company have to go, do we want to partner with this company? Is it vaporware? Is it a dream? Is it real? There's lots of people come with amazing ideas, and there's very few people who can build a business that actually executes on it. So that's well known in the industry. So I totally agree with that. And one thing I wanted to say before I get into the bottom up piece, there is a role of top down. The company's culture has to allow bottom-up innovation. And so I think for people in this call who may be thinking, who may be in more senior leadership roles, who are thinking like, yes, I want bottom-up innovation. Why is that happening? The problem could be with you because you have to have a culture in your company that values bottom-up innovation and tolerates the necessary failure that will come with that. Because if you let people have the ability to come up with new ideas and experiment, well, some will work and some won't. But if you have a culture that assigns blame, then those ideas are going to be, stillborn. They're never going anywhere. No one's going to raise them to you. So I think the first thing is there is a responsibility for those who do have the leadership title, the management title, to foster the culture that allows bottom-up innovation, first of all. And then I think secondly, once you do that, then as a leader, you will also need to encourage it by example, by, I think, not explicitly in meetings and in occasions always feel like you have to dominate the conversation. And sometimes it's very hard because when you're in a call with people who work for you, they don't want to talk over you. They want to, if you speak, they're going to assume you're right. So you have to sometimes deliberately say, well, this is a terrible idea I'm going to talk about. And you have to deliberately show them that you need their help, so they feel comfortable sharing it. So I think to encourage bottom-up innovation, you have to almost show extreme humility to encourage them to feel that they can contribute. And an example of I will give of where we have had bottom-up innovation, and is an interesting one because we've, as a company, we're looking at our features. We had heard from someone in the company that we should have a risk management module, and for many years. You laugh. For many years, we were like, no, we don't need this risk management module. No one needs it. And then we finally built the first version, and it was a wild success. Everyone's like, yeah, we'll upgrade to this new feature, this new level because of it. So like, oh wow, that's pretty good. So that's an example where the leadership, the formal leadership was like, no, this is not important. Oh, well, we'll do it anyway because he keeps banging on about it. We may as well keep him quiet. And he's like, man, he was right. So yeah, so I think that's a great example. Of when that happens. So I would say that's true. And another thing is also sometimes the power of saying no. That was good too. As Dudley says, if you say yes to everything, you're not a leader, because everyone can offer you things every day of the week. Time is valuable. You have to, as Dudley says, prioritize. And and that means saying no. And when you say no to something, it means you're now giving time for the things you've said yes to.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear, Adam. I picked on a few things, like, you mentioned about the fear of failure and the culture that needs to actually, be nourishing and supportive of bottom-up innovation. Otherwise, people are going to withdraw and not necessarily be able to contribute because their ideas are going to be put down. And at the same time, also being able to say no appropriately, because if you say yes for everything, you're going to stand up for nothing, right? So which is very true, and which goes back to the point that Dudley was talking about in terms of just because technology could do it doesn't mean that we should do it. The use case for it, the business need for it. And I wanted to think out loud here for the audience. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, culture, this is going to be resonating with a lot of people. It feels like leadership, the top leadership, shoulders the responsibility for creating that culture in the organization for all these innovations to survive. And I'm sure you recall, Peter Drucker, one of the management guru of the century, basically said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I'm sure you all remember that. So Jim, I wanted to direct this question to you. Based upon what Jim, both Adam and Dudley were mentioning in terms of culture, how much do you think leadership at all levels is required to establish this culture? Is it only from the top down that the culture is getting established, or is everybody going to be contributing to this culture? Specifically from an IT organization standpoint, how much do you think IT organization leadership creates this culture as well? So maybe can you expand on your thoughts on this one?
Sure. Well, I'll start with, it needs to come from the top to set the tone, but I think there's got to be support through all levels of management, particularly, done through how we evaluate people and how we write job descriptions and how we, set priorities needs to be tied to our culture. How does IT play a role in this? By setting an example, and I can share with you a story that I lived through. A couple roles back, I had an IT team that the way they situated the office, they put my team at the front door. Don't ask me why. So when someone came in, the first person they saw was, a 6'7" burly guy that used to play college football. Yet he was the nicest, most gentle guy in the world, and he greeted everybody with enthusiasm and excitement. And this was one of my system engineers. This particular team, wasn't just this one guy, but this particular team was rated the best in the organization, significantly higher than other departments on how we took care of our retail stores. My customer, unlike Dudley and Adam, my customer is our retail stores. And when we did our quarterly surveys on departmental performance for our operations, we were head and shoulders above everybody. And, what the result of that was lifting the other departments up in performance, because if the tech team can do this, everyone should be able to. So a little personal story that I think that helped create a culture of excellence, and these guys showed tremendous leadership in the organization.
That's very good example, very good story that you mentioned, Jim, right there. I was trying to relate to something that I heard before. It's more like what leadership creates the vision, whereas leadership at all levels carries that vision forward. Because if the support is not there from everybody else, it doesn't matter how much fire the leader has, the senior leader has. If the leadership from everybody else is not present, the fuel, the fire at some point is going to die. The leadership is more bidirectional in this case. So this is fantastic. I would like to stop here because we've been talking for quite some time, and go back to the audience over here. Les, do you have any questions from the audience at this point that you may want to send me?
Thanks, Sriram. As a matter of fact, I do, and it sort of ties in very nicely with a lot of the things that our three panelists have been talking about up until now. And the question comes from one of our faculty colleagues and a good friend, Darren, who works in the College of Professional Studies. And the question he asks is one that's that really makes a question, brings up an issue for us that talks about the role of leadership and the continued efforts that leaders make within an organization, associating it with mentorship and coaching. And we also teach this in our courses, that this is mentorship essentially is a force multiplier, if you will, within an organization. And so the question that Darren has is that the question that he poses to us is, how can we leverage, based on your experiences, how do we leverage mentorship within an organization to strengthen leadership qualities in our immediate and maybe even not so immediate staff? So how do we leverage mentorship as part of our leadership responsibilities to strengthen leadership qualities within our immediate and maybe not so immediate staff? Maybe you might provide us with some thoughts.
Yeah, that's like a Okay, go ahead, Dudley. You raise your hand.
I got that one.
Raise my hand. So, I mean, throughout my career, especially working for others, both internally and externally, I've always had a series of mentors. I think how to embed that into an organization is what I've observed very often is people within an organization either try and find mentors that are more senior than them for political favor, and generally within their own organization, which is sort of putting a disservice to necessarily what you're trying to achieve through mentorship. So where I've found a huge amount of value to me is finding mentors outside of my necessarily either area of expertise or discipline in hierarchy, purely because the mentor helps me talk through a problem. They're not there to solve the problem. They're there to try and help me think about it in a different way from a different lens than my own. But also trying to find mentors that I naturally wouldn't get on with on a personality perspective. Is we all have to operate around organizations with a lot of different cultures, genders, personality and types that we don't necessarily naturally get on with. And I found that necessarily through mentorship, a benefit of trying to understand very different personality types than my own, of the way that they think about things to help me navigate an organization. So there's a lot of benefits of stepping outside of your domain and learning from others, but not only from the discipline or the lens, but also from the cultural perspective, because we all have to work together.
That's a wonderful thought process, Dudley. Adam, Jim, anybody want to add your thoughts to this question?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. You know, I lead a bunch of technology guys, and you know, we are.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Dudley. And you know, we're stereotypically, you know, not friendly or introverted. So you know, we don't have a group of leaders, generally speaking. So you know, I put a lot of effort into all of the guys on the team, doing my best to help them understand what it is to be a leader and influence positive change in organization, you know, set examples in the organization. And, you know, some of them, it works great. Some of them stop bothering me, leave me alone. But I think it's important to put the effort into, you know, helping people understand what we mean by you should be a leader in your organization. Just because your box on the org chart doesn't say manager, director, vice president, doesn't mean you can't, you know, set an example, which is leadership.
That's great. Adam, do you have another point to make over here?
I'm trying to think. I mean, we're a smaller company, so some of the mentorship stuff comes when I was working at a larger previous organization. I do feel like it's very important to make time outside, as not just outside of your company, because obviously you should do that anyway. Like if you're a CEO, join a CEO group, you know, a mentoring group. And if you're a project manager, you know, join a project management discipline or whatever discipline you're in, you find a community of practice that, you know, you can get mentorship, you know, laterally, as it were. But within any company, and now we're getting bigger, we're doing more of this. I think it's important to talk to people and just have informal, there's a great power of the, you know, the water cooler or the coffee conversation with someone in a different part of the organization, just to check in and see what's going on and talk through what they're doing. And, you know, in some ways that ends up becoming almost a mentorship conversation. It's not formal career mentorship, you know, do those as well. But, you know, there's the, like 360 feedback and all that stuff can get very formal. Sometimes it's just nice to, you know, walk over to another part of the office and just start chatting randomly to people in the company and find out what's going on in their lives and what motivates them, what empowers them, what, you know, what personality, other people, interpersonal stuff they're dealing with. And I remember the Marriott Way was a book I read a while back. And one of the things I always remember about that was the hands-on leadership. How, you know, he would go to travel to a single property every single day. And that's insane. But I think oftentimes, especially in technology leadership, people tend to be like, well, I'll go meet with the heads of departments and that'll be it. And I'll sit in my ivory glass cubicle and, you know, run the company through Excel. And that's not leadership. And so mentorship needs to be being accessible to people, to come with their problems and come with their challenges and be there to help mentor people on an ad hoc basis, as well as all the formal stuff.
And that's, yes, Dudley.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Adam was saying, and to give a different perspective to Darren is you're absolutely right. Is technology good technologists, they do have certain personality types. And at some time, depending on the organization that you're in, there is actually a cultural or corporate structural clash very often with technology, is that very, very good technologists can sometimes be very, very poor managers. And we confuse access to career growth, whereas many good technologists want to remain an individual contributor, but the reward structure within an organization only allows within banding to achieve necessary compensation side of things by the management of others. And they're sometimes at very much conflict. So for one of those things to look at the motivations of individuals and the behaviors potentially would be to also go back to your, to your HR leadership to see if the right motivations are in place for the right personalities that are very often end up in technology that are generally the ones more on the introverted perspective. And a framework or an academia framework is looking at, say, the Schwartz system, of where it looks at the cultural values between an individual and the organization to see where the alignment is there. So there are some things more deeper necessarily than that mentorship that are really around the alignment and the motivations to those individuals, especially in technology.
That's very well said. It was beautifully worded between the three of you. One thing I wanted to mention over here is, if leadership is all about learning, if people are not uncomfortable in what they are trying to do, they are not actually learning at all. From that aspect, the personal RACI that I call, who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. What about your own personal RACI? If you are the architect of your future, you need to have that particular RACI, and that could come from multiple people. It need not be necessarily associated with your current company, because why should the current company all the time be responsible for your continuous learning? Because you need to be the architect of your future, and you need to hold that in your hands too. So like Dudley mentioned, there may be somebody who comes from within your organization. And as you are moving up in your ability to manage and become leaders, obviously leadership is delivering through people. As a result of that, you will have to associate with multiple types of people. And so alignment is extremely important in terms of knowing more about power brokers within your organization who knows about you, and mentors who coach you on certain aspects of it, and coaches further take on an additional level of how you can continue to grow yourself. So these are very good, which actually allowed me to reflect on another point that I wanted to ask. And I have this urge to ask this question right now. Now, companies aim to make a profit, but focusing only on profit orientation alone, I think people get into the unethical aspects of things. For instance, if we learned anything from DuPont's toxic dumping of chemical waste in the river to save operating costs, or the San Luis chemical mix-up of infant formula in the milk powder to see high protein content, or even the Enron's financial scandal, the BP oil spill problems with TransUnion and Halliburton, and the list goes on. If all these things we have learned from these things, from these failures, then I don't think we should be seeing the accounting scandals that recently hit from Wells Fargo. Moreover, with technology becoming more or less the central backbone for all our personal as well as company livelihood, there is increasing dependency about security and privacy. Now, SolarWinds security challenges came up recently, and we had challenges with the data breaches from Equifax. And even recently, the Facebook and Instagram were shut down for a limited amount of time, where a lot of companies that thrived on the Facebook marketplace were struggling. Now, when you look at all these things, ethical issues, privacy and security data breaches that are all coming from the IT industry specifically, is this indicative of some level of leadership failure? And if so, what can we do to address this challenge? Who from our panelists would like to take this question?
I can start with it if you want.
All right, sure, Adam.
The big
Uh,
question.
I deal a lot with, we deal a lot with, we sell software that helps with testing and quality assurance, and so we deal a lot with privacy and security and all the other and ethical. We operate in different countries, and cultural norms are different. So the first answer to your question is, is the failure of leadership the root cause, effectively, of all those different things? And I would say yes in some cases, and maybe no in others, actually. So security is a particularly interesting one, because you can literally, you can do all the right things. You can literally have the best policies, procedures, the latest technology, and unfortunately, it's an asymmetric battle. You just has one attacker with a 0-day vulnerability that gets into one place with one person clicking one wrong link. You can have a catastrophic data breach. And unfortunately, governments, everyone wants to blame people. So governments will fine you, the GDPR and European Union will have all these laws and rules. The reality is technology, unfortunately, does favor the attacker, at least in its current form. It's the asymmetrical battle when you have the Peloponnesian War, where they're coming in the field of battle. The battlefield is narrow for defense. We don't have the ability to respond in kind. So an offensive attack against a system will find that weak point. So that, I think, is a slightly different case. But when you look at more of the ethical side, when you're looking at the Wells Fargos, the Enrons, the years ago Union Carbide in India years ago, where you're looking at where people there are known issues and we've chosen not to follow them, that because of the money motive, that's a slightly different problem. And so if a security breach, so there are some security breaches where they knew there was a vulnerability, it could have been fixed and it wasn't. That's a different story than some of the cases where I think they did follow all good practices and still the breach happened. So we have to unscramble that a little bit and unpack that a little bit. But certainly where people who were the subject matter experts, back to Dudley's point and Jim's point about we're not the SMEs anymore. As a leader, if SMEs are coming to you and say, look, if we don't do this is what's going to happen, or there's a 90% chance of this happening, or even a 70% chance of this happening, using a risk philosophy, you should be at least, as a leader, being able to put aside the profit motive and take action. On the other hand, you have to run a business. As Dudley mentioned before, you have to make hard calls. This does put not money first, but you can't spend money on everything all the time, or there'll be nothing left to run. So you have to find out, where can you apply the appropriate measures that are affordable for the business and sustainable for the business, so you're not taking a short-sighted action. So it's complex. It's a complex problem. But if you have good people in your organization and you listen to them, good subject matter experts won't present you with an ultimatum of you have to do this or nothing. They will come up with options, and then you as the leader have to respect their subject matter expertise, figure out what's affordable, what's doable, and if the company's culture is driven by the values of the mission rather than just the money, I feel like the leaders and the people will make good decisions. But it's complicated.
Yeah,
it's complicated.
Yeah, if I add to that, Adam, 100% agree with that. I think these individual examples happen for very different reasons in most cases. Wells Fargo was money, right? And in other cases, it's it's poor risk management or neglect. I think in the cases where it's money driven, that's less of a failure of leadership per se than a failure of the individual who's in the leadership role. And, this is where companies need to do a better job at how they reward people. If doing the wrong thing is going to make me enough money to sail off into the sunset, some people are going to pursue that course, and others won't. But, I think companies sometimes make it too easy for people to make the wrong choice because of financial motivation.
I like the way both Adam, you and Jim put this, expanding on what Dudley was mentioning. I took a note of this primarily, failure of people in leadership role versus failure of leadership themselves. So that's very good. Are there, at this point, I would like to have one more, or maybe a couple more questions, but before that, Les, are there any questions from people?
I'd like to add something in. I'd like to add another perspective into that, Sri.
Yes,
I also think it's a very symptomatic of the market. We're working in an environment that is high change, high development, and not necessarily innovation, but iteration to enhance product. the compromises around quality is clients or the customers are very unwilling to pay the price for the level of quality of perfection. And so the challenge you've got is not necessarily poor leadership within the organization, because they'll all be very well aware, especially, you know, for the organizations that you mentioned. But there are some distinct compromises of either time to market to achieve quality levels, or the cost of which to develop to necessarily that high level of quality criteria. Most organizations or providers in the market would be unable to sell an appliance, although maybe best appliance in market, but the client in the private sector is too price sensitive.
Yes.
Very good.
Very good.
Leadership within our customer, right? We need basically customers to be their own leader. I mean, customers are not necessarily always the best leaders themselves. They want perfection at the lowest price.
Very good.
Sorry.
That's a great point. And I know in the interest of time, I just want to make sure Darren has a question, and I'm gonna ask Aaron if you could help Darren unmute in a minute. But before we get to that, Darren, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask one question that I think applies to a lot of who we are here in the audience, which includes obviously significant number of students. And one of the questions that we had posed to us prior to when we first had everybody sign up for this webinar, that I thought was very, very intriguing, and one that I hope you all can address, hopefully, you know, as quickly as possible, because I was always, I really was. I told everybody, my biggest fear was that we would run out of time. And that is always something that happens in a situation like this when we have such a rich discussion. But the question was, as people in the industry, as leaders in the industry right now, for the three of you, what would you want the universities, the colleges, to provide their students? It doesn't have to be students in the leadership program, but leadership in what they provide our students in general. What would you want to see them provide their students by way of leadership education, if you will? It could be through an elective, could be through just an addition to a course that would benefit you as industry leaders, that you could then take away and say, all right, this is what I want. This is the kind of beginning, something I don't have to teach you, because you're already coming in with this level of knowledge when it comes to foundations of leadership. What might you suggest? Any ideas?
The short one I would say is, and we've heard it from college students recently, number one thing is there is no right answer. When you come from university, that is like earth shattering for them, that there's no one right answer anyway.
Very good. Dudley?
For me would be a module on how to innovate in an organizational context. You know, the reality is all companies want to innovate, but innovation can also be extremely disruptive. And how it relates into change management for an organization, what it tests. So for me, you know, because large organizations have politics, so it would be more a case of innovation's one thing, executing and implementing is another. And I think there also needs to be the how it's done, not necessarily the what.
Very good.
And the larger the organization, the more of the external factors of success or failure become apparent. Whereas in your own business, you can make your own decisions. But if you're going to be employed by somebody else, it's how to influence.
Very good. Very nice. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of tying maybe a few things together that were said earlier and reinforce what Adam or Dudley just said. You know, there's a lot of sort of soft skills related to leadership, as you well know. And people in technical disciplines, engineers, they don't learn these things in school. And I think things like listening, we started with that a while ago. How do I influence? Understanding power structures in organizations. You know, they're not exposed to any of this at all. And I think even just one course that covers at you know, a certain level, these important topics that you're going to run into in the organization that you don't run into until you're in the organization will prepare people a lot better.
Very good. Excellent. Very nicely said. Sriram, let's let Darren get in here and ask a question. We're kind of running a little short on time, but I definitely want to get there because Darren is a student of leadership. I've found that over the years, and I want to get him in here to ask the question. Go ahead, Darren.
Great, thank you very much. I wanted to bring up an opportunity to get some feedback from the panel here in terms of the importance of understanding likelihood and severity within the decisions. I work in the food arena, and we look at how some of the most significant outbreaks and recalls ultimately involve the fact that no one had really any sense of the likelihood and severity in terms of the consequences of such actions. And in addition to the idea of severity, when you look at the Peanut Corporation of America, where the food industry was literally shocked that the CEO received 28 years in federal prison for his role in the deaths of 9 people and the illnesses of upwards of 22,000 people, there was this element in terms of, do we need new laws? Well, the government wasn't really enforcing some laws. The DOJ wasn't following up on some laws like the corporate responsible corporate officer doctrine. So I really emphasize that to my students, that idea of not only likelihood and severity when it comes to consumers and customers, but also of the actions. And people are surprised that those extremes can exist. What are your thoughts on that in terms of balancing out that idea of, oh, it's just the cost of doing business?
Interesting.
I mean, I can have a go at that. I think, Darren, from my perspective, for me, the question would depend on the relevance. You know, if you're a small business, the impact is less severe, yes, theoretically. So you've got a much larger appetite of risk, because even in the event that you've been compromised, the implications on a small business are negligible. You know, most founders of a smaller business are sat behind LLCs or C Corps, so they've got limited liability. So they've got a much bigger appetite because their whole focus is growth. I think you then come to a large organization, and it's not necessarily the relevance of the individual issue. There are much broader implications on the business. So brand reputational damage, which for large brands represents the vast amount of value on their balance sheet, but also in the retail sector, necessary customer loyalty to that brand in the event of negative press. And so I think it's got a big influence. For me, is the relevance necessarily of policy, procedure, and law on the size of the organization and the potential impacts. Because, you know, it's like driving your car. You know, you're meant to be at 55 on the highway and 80% of people will speed, because the implications of it are so small, because it's at a micro level. So I think it will be around the relevance and the impact on the business itself, and not necessarily about the issue itself, but what are the broader impacts on the business.
Very nice.
I mean, I could probably add a little bit maybe to that. And Darren, I think what you're asking is, you know, how do we get people to pay attention and bring these things up and care about the possible implications? And I think, you know, back to the discussion around where does leadership start? You know, whether people bring up potential issues to management and management does anything about them is a cultural thing in organizations. If there's demonstrated care for solving problems that could have a potential, you know, broader impact, people are going to bring them to management, but management can't just ignore it.
Very nice.
It's well, I was thinking about this listening to it, and it also reminds me of, was it the what's it called? There's the thought experiment where you have a train that's going to go down a track, and you can let the track go down the track, and you can kill 4 people, yeah. Or you can throw a switch, and it will go down the other track and kill only 1 person. But one is an act of an action, and it goes back to malfeasance and nonfeasance. So a lot of big companies, I think, like Dudley was mentioning, they're going to be focusing a lot more on avoiding malfeasance, and in doing so, you inadvertently may commit nonfeasance. And do the courts in America more likely go after an organization or individuals for, certainly in a criminal sense, if it's an act of negligence, which is then pierces the corporate veil potentially for individuals, if they did commit negligence in their officer role, versus if they were just carrying out orders of the company, and therefore protected by the company itself. But also in an international perspective, different countries have different thoughts. I mean, America seems to be this hands-off world where you can do anything you like until we send you in jail. We'll go after you with the DOJ, will go after you and send you to jail, or we'll completely ignore you. Whereas if you go to Europe, for example, there's a lot more, I think, government regulation on a micro level, but less of this criminal intent on the macro level. It's more almost more consistent, which is sort of annoying if you're a smaller company, but if you're a big company, probably is more rule based, because again, it's a Napoleonic code. It's more rule based. You know where you stand. America, it's sort of like do no harm unless you get found out, and then hope you don't go to jail. If you do, get good lawyers. I mean, it's just the differences in the common law and, you know, civil law system, I think, encourage it. But I know one thing I always found very fascinating is I'm British and then I live in America now. In Britain, people always talk about fitness for purpose. Everything in the news whenever something goes wrong is, was this fit for purpose? And yet in America, that lexicon doesn't really exist. No one uses that here. And I've always found it fascinating. When something bad happens here, we assume that the lawyers will get involved. In Britain or in Europe, if something bad happens, we assume the government will get involved. It just seems to be that. I don't know.
Interesting. Sriram, why don't you go ahead and take it home?
Yeah. I think in the interest of time, I wanted to wrap things up. Again, thanks. I can't thank you enough, Adam, Dudley, and Jim, for all the information that you have shared. And truly, you are demonstrating here servant leadership by giving your time as well as sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it on behalf of the university as well as, you know, personally on from my own experience. Thanks, Les, for giving this opportunity. And before I try to also, you know, wrap it up, I want to acknowledge Erin Johnson. She was the person behind the whole thing for marketing and technology and everything else. So, you know, thank you, Erin. Without that, you know, nothing would have been possible. And thanks again for all the wonderful, engaging questions. I know it's only 1 hour and there is not much we could be doing with each and every one of those topics, and questions could be talked for another full 1 hour too. So with that, I will try to wrap it up. Les, I will pass the talking stick back to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We've been hoping to do this for quite some time and to create some sort of a platform and a forum for bringing industry leaders into a discussion with our students and faculty within the College of Professional Studies and the university as a whole. And we also invited people from the outside, other industries as well, who are currently with us here today. And I thank you all for coming. I cannot think of a subject that is more important today, a subject that's been more important in history but has not gotten that kind of attention than leadership. I don't care if you look at it from the global leadership on down, what's happening between countries, what's happening within countries, across the board, industry, business, everywhere. I would argue to you, as I have to everyone I talk to, especially as an instructor and a faculty lead in the leadership program, that everything depends on leadership. And if it's good leadership, you're going to see the results in people coming together, working together, living together, peacefully understanding how to relate to each other. When it's bad leadership, then it's obvious. We see what happens when that comes up. So the bottom line in all of this is that it's all about leadership, and understanding leadership is our responsibility. I think as human beings, we need to understand what part do we play in this process. And I think our three panelists today, I really mean that, Adam, Dudley, and Jim, you brought that out in us. You raised that awareness level, and you shared with us ideas about what it is that we need to think about when it comes to good leadership, consider the issues, and how do we pass that on to people who are depending on us. And this is what it's all about, people who depend on us to make, if you will, to make the world go around. And very often it all centers on us and people in leadership positions, and how do we bring new people aboard to do the same thing and to improve on what we have. So I want to thank you, the three of you. I want to thank the audience. Thank you all for coming. And our next session will be sometime, I believe, in January. We're going to talk about the healthcare industry next. And after that, we'll talk about the construction industry as part of our webinar series. And yeah, what better subject than to talk about the possibilities of leadership. And thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.